Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, selamat malam. Hari ini hari Minggu ataupun hari Ahad, kita masih lagi bersama anda di hari raya ini. Di hari yang mulia hari ini, pada jam 10 malam ini, kita akan membawa satu kisah update yang terkini, yang mana semua rakyat Malaysia ingin tahu cerita sebenar daripada cerita-cerita yang tak sebenar yang mana kita baca dalam sosial media. Ada yang netizen cakap macam ini, ada yang melaporkan macam ini, macam gitu, macam-macam, sehingga kan rakyat Malaysia dan rakyat dunia terkeliru dengan apa yang benar-benar berlaku di Ukrain dan di Palestin. Dengan tidak membuangkan masa lagi, pada hari ini saya telah mendapat seorang rakyat daripada Ukrain, yang mana orangnya terkenal di Ukrain dan di Amerika. Beliau merupakan salah seorang pemuzik terkenal, iaitu pemain gitar terkenal, selebriti, yang berasal daripada Ukrain, bernama Val di Bransky, atau kita panggil dia Mr. Val. Okay? Beliau merupakan lahirnya daripada Ukrain tetapi menetap di Amerika. Professionally, dia adalah American guitarist, composer, educator, dan juga dia berkecimpung dalam lakonan, recording artist, producer, television producer. Dia memainkan lagu-lagu blues, jazz, rock, classical music dan lain-lain. Dengan apanya berlaku di Ukraine, yang mana telah diceroboh oleh Russia dikatakan, beliau memainkan peranan yang penting dalam sosial media, mewakili negara beliau, Ukrain, dan juga rakyat Ukrain. Beliau mengadakan mengadakan live streaming tentang apa yang berlaku di Ukrain, apa yang tak patut berlaku di Ukrain, macam mana untuk menyelesaikan masalah-masalah di Ukrain, dan macam-macam lagi. So, dengan tidak membuangkan masa lagi, saya telah mendapatkan beliau daripada Houston, Amerika. Beliau tinggal di Houston, Amerika, daripada Ukraine, iaitu Mr. Val di Bransky. Good evening, Mr. Val. Good morning, Mr. Val. I'm sure your time is morning, right?
Yes, it's 9 o'clock in Houston here in Texas.
We can't hear you a bit. Can you speak a bit louder?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now a little bit, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, it's 9 o'clock here in Houston, I'm saying.
Your voice is becoming softer now, Mr. Val. Is it you far away from your microphone?
I'm just speaking up loud. I'm trying to speak up loud.
Now okay. Now okay. What is the time now in Houston now?
It's 9 in the morning.
9 in the morning. I'm sorry to wake you up early in the morning.
It's okay. It's okay. I have a baby, so he keeps me awake all the time.
Okay, we have our correspondent representative from Palestine, Mr. Ilyas.
Hello, Mr.
Assalamualaikum, Mr. Ilyas.
Welcome to our American/Ukrainian guest.
Welcome. Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, Mr. Val, first of all, we would like to say thank you very much for allowing us to have a special moment with you tonight or this morning to talk about Ukraine, which, as everybody knows, Russian invade Ukraine. Okay. Actually, the first question that we have to get a strong update from your side, why has Russia invaded Ukraine, and what does Putin wants from Ukraine?
Well, it's only a guess. It's inside of Putin's head. But the invasion of Ukraine was brewing for years. It wasn't just started yesterday. First of all, the Crimea and Donetsk region were taken in 2014. So for Ukrainians, for Ukraine, the war started with Russia in 2014. When 15,000 Ukrainians died in 2014, within 3 months. And that proxy war was going on since 2014. The big invasion started on February 24th, 2022, with rockets, with ballistic rockets going all over Ukraine. Every city in Ukraine, 26 major cities got bombed within 30 minutes. So we don't know what the goal of Putin is, but obviously he himself said it publicly that he wants to correct what Lenin did, make those mistakes disappear, and make the new world order. So that new world order probably starts with Ukraine, which means basically a genocide of Ukrainian nation. And he said that Ukrainians have no right to exist, and Ukraine is not a country, it's just basically Russia. And then probably restoring pre-1991 the borders of Soviet Union, and then probably influencing economically globally. That's what my guess is.
Okay. There is a next question that we have here that we want to know. What are the issues between Kyiv and Moscow?
Well, again, Moscow now is basically Mr. Putin. You know, I have friends in Moscow who live. They don't share what Putin does. You know, Kyiv is an ancient Ukrainian city. You know, it's an ancient state. It's a 1,500-year-old state where Moscow is basically 400 years old. So obviously, the ambitions of Moscow is to make sure that Kyiv doesn't have the ability to decide its own fate. As long as Kyiv has the government that's basically a puppet government of Moscow, then Moscow is fine. What happened in Kyiv in 2019, by popular vote, 73% of population voted for Zelensky as a president. Now keep in mind that Zelensky is not from any establishment. He is an entertainer, like I'm an entertainer. And so nobody could pressure him on any issues. That's why he was so popular. And as you see, he's a true patriot. You know, he stayed in Kyiv when the bombs going on. He could have left a long time ago, but he didn't. So, and that kind of inspired every Ukrainian as well to fight to the end. So the issue between Kyiv and Moscow now is even more apart because of the invasion of Moscow. And after what happened in Bucha, the massacre in Bucha, I think every negotiation with Russia is sort of halted because obviously it's not a regular war that you could expect. And in our lifetime, I don't know any cruelty as such that happened from Russian soldiers in Ukraine.
Mr. Val, what is happening now in Ukraine in terms of the environment of the citizens in Ukraine?
Well, obviously after a month and a half, the Russian forces left Kyiv surrounding territories and kind of regrouped in Crimea and in eastern Ukraine. So majority of the fights that are going on are near Kharkiv, from Kharkiv all the way to Kherson, which is kind of eastern southern Ukraine, from the north to the east and to the west. So obviously the goal for Putin is probably for the 9th of May to deliver Mariupol and sort of declare kind of a victory in a sense for him. And obviously the goal for him also to make sure that Ukraine has no access to the sea, either Black Sea or the Azov Sea, which will be a disaster for the world because Ukraine exports tons and tons of wheat to many, many countries. So those countries are going to starve. So, but that's typical Russian tactics, basically making sure that they have a blackmail, either gas, oil, or wheat, or food, whatever it is, you know, they will do that. So right now, like for example, my wife's grandmother, she's stationed in Severodonetsk, which is Luhansk region, and she's been living in the basement for 2 months now with other 30 people there, and she can't get out because of the shelling, and it's heavily bombarded as we speak. so every day. And there's a chance that they will increase the Russians will increase the attacks after the May 9th, which is the Tuesday.
Mr. Val, if you may answer this question, or if you may know, why America so interested in Ukraine by helping Ukraine into this war?
I think America was not interested at first. Biden himself said so in December, that if it's a minor incursion from Russia to Ukraine, it's fine. Basically, he was not preparing to any help for Ukraine whatsoever, just like Obama did.
Yeah.
Obama did nothing.
Yeah.
And Biden was basically Obama number 2. So nobody expected, I think, nobody expected in the world, including Biden and Europe, that Ukraine is going to fight and they're going to stand the ground. They were okay with some fringy country, Ukraine and Europe, which is not as fringy as we see it now, but obviously that was the stance of a lot of leaders, the Western leaders. And what surprised the world is that Ukrainians didn't flee. They stood the ground, and after Zelensky addressed the Congress in the US, the congressman pressured Biden, and he was probably surprised because he had to act. He's supposed to be the leader of the free world, so he didn't act. You know, the laughable sanctions that they did in the first place, it was just for political show, had nothing, no effect whatsoever. And Russians were killing as much as they can, right? So the only leader that I saw that sort of, from the Western world, that sort of acted upon swiftly was Boris Johnson from the UK. And also the countries like Lithuania was the first one who actually did something, and then Poland joined very shortly. So I think America, as you see by example, was not interested in helping Ukraine. So that rhetoric, which is basically Russia saying that it's all about America, well, it's not. Russia will use NATO, America, whatever they call the Nazi, they call anything they want to invade anybody they want. But the fact is that that America was not interested is true. However, now everything's changed because the European nations realized that how close it is to the World War II, and World War III has reminiscence of the World War II stories, and Europeans remember it very well. So and they started to act upon it, except Germany, of course. And then Biden was forced to, by Congress and then by the leaders in the West, to act upon it. And just imagine, only a month ago, the European Union said, okay, we're giving $50 billion to Ukraine to help to fight the Russians. When Biden said, I'm giving 80 million, it's laughable, right? You know, in Texas, in Houston, only the budget for repairing a road, like 1 mile, is about that budget. So it's laughable. But then, obviously, things changed. And now, as you see, Biden is going to sign the Lend-Lease on Monday, on May 9th. And if so, this is going to be the second time in the history that the Lend-Lease is implemented after the World War II. And the World War II was won by Lend-Lease, if you remember. Without the Lend-Lease, I think we'll all be speaking German now.
Okay, we come back to you on a few more questions, Mr. Val. For time being, we're going to cross to Palestine with Mr. Ilyas. Mr. Ilyas, today we have some new question for you. I know you've been updating us on Palestine Mosque, especially on Al-Aqsa Mosque, but it came out to us about an history about Palestine. The history came on how Israel occupied the whole of Palestine in 1967, meaning it started in 1967. Can you explain to us on these issues?
Well, it did not start in 1967. It all started in 1947 when the United Nations decided to partition Palestine into two countries, two states, an Arab state and a Jewish state, and it gave the Jewish state something like 46% of the historical land of Palestine between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, and allocating for the Arab state 44% of the area of the land, and the 3% were left only for an international zone that would include Jerusalem and Bethlehem because of the holy shrines in both cities, like the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And a year later, David Ben-Gurion, who became the first Prime Minister of Israel, proclaimed the creation of the state unilaterally on his own, and he based his decision, of course, on the UN resolution that was rejected by the Palestinians at the time. It was totally unfair to the Palestinians, but then the state of Israel was created, and so on and so forth. 19 years later, Israel launched a war against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, and occupied territories from those three countries: the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, Gaza and Gaza Strip that was under Egyptian rule at the time, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. And that's when exactly the remaining part of Palestine became under the occupation of the Israelis. Today is now we're talking with our friend, Ukrainian American friend, about the situation there, and I would say, and I would allow myself to say, that we Palestinians, as victims of an occupation that started 74 years ago, we have very strong reasons to sympathize with the Ukrainians, with what is happening in their country, with the kind of military offensive by the Russians in Ukraine, but also we are equally annoyed and disturbed at the fact that our cause that has been going on for the last 74 years did not get the kind of attention that our friends, the people in Ukraine, received in 2 months after the start of the military campaign, the Russian military campaign in Ukraine. And this for us is very painful, simply because it shows how the world is treating with the plight of nations, no matter what nations are involved. But the superpowers, the strong countries, the main countries in the West, deal with the causes in such a selective way that they cannot care less about the Israeli occupation that started 74 years ago, and then the second phase of the occupation, which started 54 years ago. And what happened is that we are until today living under the Israeli occupation, and there were so many resolutions by the United Nations, by the European Union, by almost everybody that supported a two-state solution, supported the right of Palestinian people to self-determination, but nothing was done to enforce Israel or to force her or enforce on her the implementation of those resolutions. Even the United Nations General Assembly resolution that was adopted in 2012, on the 29th of September 2012, it accorded Palestine the status of a state, but a non-member state of the United Nations. And until today, from 2012 until today, 10 years, and nothing was done, with the exception of only one state that voted, the one country from Europe that recognized Palestine, the United Nations accepted and recognized our state, and that is Sweden. Other than Sweden, no other European country came forth. And we always argue, Palestinians, that for the countries to support the two-state solution, they already have their diplomatic ties and full relations with Israel. Now they have to establish full diplomatic ties with the state of Palestine and make it a reality before it is too late. If this Palestinian state is not created today, before tomorrow, and if the world, and I don't accept the argument that the whole world now is busy with the Ukrainian crisis, because the Ukraine crisis before 2 months ago was almost not there. It was part of the dealing and wheeling between the West and the East, between Russia and the West, but they did nothing before the Ukraine crisis. Now they would say, well, because of the Ukraine crisis, we're busy. No, they're not busy. there are ticking bombs in the Ukraine, in Palestine, and under the occupation of the Israelis, and these ticking bombs need to be dealt with. These are more serious than the COVID-19 ticking bomb that we faced 3 years ago, the whole universe faced. But the whole universe was united to fight the COVID-19, and there isn't that kind of unity that we would love to see to put an end to the Ukrainian crisis, to the Palestinian crisis or conflict or occupation. Everybody has different names and terminologies, but the matter of the fact that the main principal issue is our friend from the Ukraine, and I really salute what he said, that he wants the people to recognize the right of the Ukrainian people to self-determination, something that Moscow, he said, does not want to. We also want our right to self-determination to be recognized by all the world countries so that we can have the right to build our state and gain independence and live freely on our land, exactly like every other nation, with the exception of the Ukrainians who were victims of a military offensive by Russia. And we really would have hoped that such an offensive did not take place, but this is a different story. You asked our guest about why would Russia attack Ukraine. And to tell you the truth, I mean, there's a story that we heard that circulated among many Palestinians, and it's not a joke, but it reflects. It sounds like a joke, but it reflects the kind of reality that exists in there. There was this husband who said he went to bed, and his wife said, "I don't understand why Russia decided to invade Ukraine." And he said, "It's not easy to explain. There are so many reasons. Some of them are acceptable to us, and some of them are not acceptable. But wait a minute." So he went to the kitchen. He took a knife, went back to the bed, put the knife under his pillow, and he said to his wife, "Good night." And she said, "What do you mean, good night? Why do you have this knife with you?" And he said, "Well, I feel safer with a knife under my pillow." And she said, you're crazy. You might even stab me at night when I'm asleep." And he said, "No." And she said, no, I cannot even sleep next to you with a knife under your pillow." And he said, we've been married to each other for 30 years, and you cannot even trust me when I put a knife under my pillow. Why would the Russians trust Ukraine when they are prepared to join the NATO, and then all the nuclear missiles that the NATO has will be moved from Western Europe to the Ukraine, and they will be 2 minutes away from Moscow? And this is appalling. This is how the public looks at the situation in Ukraine, and that is why one of the reasons that I would say our Palestinian leadership is very careful about is to try and maintain neutrality as much as it can in relations with the United States as well as with Russia, with so many other countries, because we are the underdog. The weak nations are not supposed to play the game of the big guys. We have superpowers. Let them let them play their own games, and let they smash their own heads, but not to involve us in that, because we don't want to be like the chess pieces moved by others. We want to live in peace. The Ukrainians want to live in peace. They should not be part of the NATO. They should not be part. But the Warsaw Pact is not there anyway, so they don't need to join it. But at least try to be as neutral as possible and be on the safe side. And this is my little advice to my friend in Houston.
Okay, Mr. Val, there is a very interesting question here that we want to know. Why did this conflict start in the first place between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I want to reply to a friend from Palestine. By the way, I have a lot of friends from Palestine living in Los Angeles, so I know quite well what's going on. And I do support that Palestine should be free and peaceful country, and I know what you mean exactly with the UN and all this. Well, first of all, UN is not the political body that everybody expects it to be. As you see, it does nothing. I'll go further. NATO is even less than UN, absolutely zero. Now, as far as your rhetoric about the knife, well, you're just repeating Russian propaganda one in one, exactly what Putin is saying to everybody else. First of all, keep in mind that the Russian invasion started in 2014. Not yesterday, not on February 24th, 2014. In fact, I was there because I opened an academy, a music academy. I was part of the Maidan. I saw what's going on. And, you know, do you know how many soldiers were in Ukrainian army in 2014? Two soldiers. So you keep saying that Russia, that we have the knife under the bed. Well, who has the nuclear weapons? Ukraine or Russia? Who gave up the nuclear weapons in 1994 in exchange for security? Ukraine did. Ukraine was the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world country. United States, Russia, and Ukraine. And George Bush Sr. made a deal with Russia, UK, Ukraine, and the US for Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons, and guess to who? To Russia. So in exchange for its security. And obviously, who didn't do that security diligence? Russia did. So you're just repeating obvious propaganda that Ukrainians were aggressive. Well, that's just BS. I was there. I was living there. My wife is there, and you know, this is just. I know exactly what this propaganda is, and I've been repeating this. And I had a lot of interviews, and in America, in Europe, and actually in Asia, in Australia, and it's the same rhetoric that Putin repeats, and nobody believes it anymore. Now, NATO was not established to attack anyone. It never did. It was established for single purpose to defeat the Western Atlantic Alliance from the aggression of Soviet Union at that time. That's the whole purpose of it. Now, if you compare Palestine, you know, I have a lot of people sending me emails from Belgrade, from Serbia. And they say the same things as you do. Like, why has Serbia had this fate? Nobody talks about the Serbian disaster, and everybody talks about Ukraine. Again, let me repeat it. Nobody talked about Ukraine in 2014. 15,000 people died. 2 million refugees were from eastern Ukraine going to the west. Nobody talked about it. In fact, I'll give you this. I was in Ukraine in 2014, and I met with the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, because I was opening a school, and I wanted to know all the details. And exactly at that time, what would happen in Ukraine? The Crimea was annexed, Donbass region, Luhansk region, houses were burnt, and all that stuff. So, and Ukraine didn't have army. The only people who fought were the volunteers, just volunteers. And they had nothing, no even weapons. So now, what happened, I go see CNN in the US. And there is an interview with the CNN and Jeffrey Pyatt from Ukraine. And Jeffrey's saying, hey, Russia invaded Ukraine. There's a guy called Gherkin, who's a Russian colonel, who led the Russian soldiers without the insignias. They had just green uniforms, but no insignias. That's why Putin says there are no Russian soldiers there. But the tanks were. Actually, the Malaysian airplane was bombed by Russian, right? And you forgot about that. So, and what happened in CNN, so Jeffrey's saying that there is a war. The CNN anchor replies and say, hey, that's your opinion. There is no war. Because the directive of Obama administration was, it's a single conflict. As you repeat, it's a conflict. It's not a conflict. It's an invasion. It's a war. Now, why it's so important for Europeans, and why you keep repeating that this is, why is it a big deal? Because it's a World War III. You have to understand, Russia is not stopping at Ukraine. It's going to Poland, to Lithuania, to Latvia, Estonia, Finland, Sweden, Romania, Hungary, Moldova, restoring everything, as I said, back to before the 1991, when the Russian soldiers were stationed. That's just the beginning of it. That's why Europeans act upon it, because they realize they're going to be bombed as well. The ballistic missile is going to shoot right at the Starbucks in London. That's why they're acting. It's not that it's a small threat. It's the biggest threat of our time. And it threatens the whole world. And it's nuclear weapons. So it's the biggest threat. And as you noticed, Israel didn't say a word about defending Ukraine, did it? Zero. Since 2014, and there's a lot of Israelis and Jewish people living in Ukraine, and they're actually very angry at Israel that they don't support Ukraine. Neutrality only helps the aggressor, always. And that's the neutrality of Israel at this moment. So we have to then see what it is. If you think that Israel is bad for Palestine, so why are they neutral to Ukraine?
Yeah.
Why is it so important for Israel to stand up and talking to Russia as it's normal?
Yeah, that is a good statement. Why Russia choose Ukraine? Yes. We want to know why Russia
Russia choose without Ukraine, Russia cannot expand. Russia was established in 17th century as an empire.
Okay.
Ever expansion.
Okay.
And they expanded to the east first. And then in 1654 they expanded to Ukraine. They took Ukraine in 1654. Then later in 1863, Ukrainian language was forbidden. It was illegal. Books were forbidden. The Tsarist Russia made the Holocaust in Ukraine. 7 to 13 million people died. That's huge numbers. Just think of those numbers.
Yes.
Right now we have 14.5 million refugees out of Ukraine. 14.5 million.
Yeah.
During the World War II, from 1939 until 1945, there were 11 million refugees, displaced people. And in 2 months, we have more than World War II. Imagine that number. 4.5. I have a fund with my wife, and we're helping the refugees. And 4.5 million, they have nowhere to go outside of Ukraine. There is no country can do this. Maybe 1, 2, 3, 5 families, but that's it. And that's 4.5 million. 10 and more, 10 and 200,000 million inside of Ukraine are displaced refugees. They have nowhere to go. People got killed. Women got raped in front of their children by Russian soldiers.
Oh.
They were getting orders to make a terror war. It's a war with a terror. Basically, what that is, ballistic missiles going. So just imagine, during the Syrian war, when Russia was involved there, there were 99 ballistic missiles put on Syria. 99. Do you know how many ballistic missiles were put on Ukraine? 1,500, 1,500 in 2 months. Just think about it. Russia is clearly telling the world, we'll destroy you. They're telling London, we'll destroy you. Of course they're going to react. They're not saying to America that they'll destroy you. They basically threatened on TV, but nothing official. But Lavrov said so. So, of course they're going to react. Of course it's a bigger deal. Of course it's a deal that it's in our lifetime, we as Ukrainians know what's going on and the numbers what's going on. Every family is affected. My family is affected in 3 relatives. And I don't have any family left in Ukraine. And they flee for life. And it's going on and going on and going on. And it's not some simple fighting solution that can be solved because, the weapons themselves don't solve anything. And negotiation with Russia, as you noticed, Putin is not interested talking to anybody in Kiev. He's just not interested. He said so himself. He doesn't recognize Ukraine as a nation. That means genocide. Just think of those words. And he's acting upon it. And number 2, Ukraine as a country should not exist. Imagine if Israel said that. Imagine if Israel said Palestine as a nation doesn't exist, we should destroy it. Imagine if Israel said Palestine as a country should not exist. Now that's a different rhetoric, isn't it? Now imagine how threatening that is with a country that's 2nd largest nuclear arsenal power in the world. And they're not holding it back. So that's why the Europeans acted upon it. Of course America didn't. And again, for those who think that America helped Ukraine, they didn't. Obama did nothing when Crimea was annexed. In fact, I think he enabled it. Quite the opposite. The only guy who helped from America to Ukraine was Trump. He was sending some weapons to Ukraine to defend themselves. That was the only guy, but that was it. The economy of Ukraine was destroyed. Then in 2014, Poroshenko took the power, and basically I was there, and I remember it was restoring it back, you know, slowly by slowly, slowly by slowly. And now, by 2020, I was just in Ukraine in 2022 on February 10th, what is like 14 days before the invasion. I opened a school. We had investors, you know. I have a reputable academy there. And the economy was booming. Bucha, that looks like ruins now, it looks like Beverly Hills. You know, people were well off. They didn't do anything bad to Russia. What did they do? Did they invade Russia? Was Ukrainian army went to Russia and invade Russia? No. And Russia is saying that Ukraine is threatening Russia. With what? With sticks? With what? It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And then, obviously, Russia, who is, again, I have to mention it again, the second largest army in the world. It's not Israel. The second largest army in the world is doing genocide and threatening Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, now Finland and Sweden, because they said they want to go to NATO. You know, it's a World War III. It's not a local conflict as Russia wants to say. Like as they say, it's a special operation, don't they? They don't even say it's a war. They don't say it's a genocide. And of course, Europeans, again, the Europeans were silent for a month. Nothing was going on.
So you're trying
The Russian
to tell
propaganda.
us, Mr. Val, you're trying to tell us Russia is making use of Ukraine to go into Europe.
Absolutely. I think it's the first start. They already said it. The vice speaker of Russian Duma, which is government, yesterday said that our first goal is to get to the Polish border, and then we'll see. Well, that means, again, and it's not my words, it's the words of Russian. You know, and I'm one of the guys who translated everything that's going on in Russia into English now, because the world is unaware, and the propaganda was so huge. The Russia Today was everywhere and all that stuff. You know, people are unaware that the Russians were always aggressive like this towards the West. Always. They never accepted Ukrainian sovereignty. Never accepted. They will never accept anything that was, as Putin said, before 1991. And that means if Polish had stationed Russian soldiers, well, he will do that. Finland has the Russian territory, and that's what he will do it. He will say, okay, so Finnish is our territory as well. I'm not even saying about the tiny countries which are not NATO countries like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. They're tiny countries. They are tiny countries. But NATO will not do anything. If Russia says we'll go there and will say we have nuclear weapons, NATO will not do anything. It's a boogeyman that Russia is telling everybody. That's all they do. And Moldova, I'm not sure if you guys know, but Moldova already has a problem, and Russia is starting a new front in Moldova, in Pridnestrovia. It's happening right now. So the moment Ukraine is going to be weak a little bit, the moment it will happen, I doubt it will happen, but if it happens, Russia will push on different fronts, and that's going to be Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia right away, without a question. Moldova too. And Moldova now, they're saying they got scared and they say, well, we want to go to NATO, we want to go to European Union and all that things. You have to be secure from the bully. But again, for my Palestinian friend, ask Israel why it's not defending Ukraine and standing with Russia. Ask that. If Israel is aggressive to Palestine, why are they with Russia?
They're not.
That's a good question.
They're supporting Ukraine.
That's a good question for you.
Mr. Elias?
No, Israel is supporting the Ukraine. Well, tried to get to take a neutral position in the beginning, but then they leaned more towards the Ukraine. after they were grilled by the West for not taking a very sharp position against
Well, what
the
happened?
Russians. And
What happened recently? Lavrov, who's the Prime Minister of Foreign Affairs, right? He's the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, which is like a state in America. So he said it publicly that Zelensky is Jewish, but Jewish can be Nazi. That he said that. And then he said that Hitler was Jewish as well. So therefore the Jews can be Nazis and they can do the Holocaust. Of course, Israel reacted to that. Of course they did. And Putin actually said sorry about it. Not Lavrov, but Putin said sorry. So since then, which is very recent, Israel started to think a little bit differently of Russia. That's the only cause that caused Israel to think differently. Because it shows the true colors of Russia as well. They're racist. I wasn't Russia. They don't like no black, no brown, no red, no anything. They don't like Asian. They don't like anybody. It's about Russian world, what they call it. And that's how they do the atrocities in Ukraine. Do you know the soldiers who go to Ukraine and kill and rape women? They from Yakutia, from Yakutsk. Burats, I'm not sure if you know, guys. These are the indigenous people of Russia that live there for many years before Russia was established, right? And they all call it Russian now because it's a federation in a sense, but it's a fake federation. It's actually not a true federation like the United States. So, and they use these ethnic groups. They hire into battalions. They have nothing to do with other ethnic groups like in Ukraine. And that's what they go and do the atrocities. Chechens, then you have the Burats, the Yakutia, and that's how Russia fights the war in Ukraine. It's the same thing they're gonna fight any war. They will never use the Slavic against the Slavic nations because they have this diversity in ethnicities and they will use them. So that's how it's a new kind of war. It's a new kind of war. And then they will repeat to the world, well, Ukrainians are our brothers. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
And who kills the Ukrainians? Yakutia, Burats, Chechens. Those are the guys who do the atrocities in Ukraine. But they are Russian army. So Putin says one thing, but does completely different, as usual, because it's KGB. Bolsheviks did all the time since 1917. The whole thing was to destroy the bourgeois class, to destroy the capitalism, to have the world revolution, and it never stopped. KGB was there, the main tool. And guess who Putin is? He's a KGB trained operator from St. Petersburg. I was in St. Petersburg in 1987-88. And I remember how KGB worked. They only cared about two things, power and money. When Gorbachev did the perestroika in Soviet Union, the KGB right away jumped on racketeering. They were the first ones to do the racketeering. And that's who they are. And everybody who Putin has around him are those guys. They dealt with cocaine before. They made money on that. You know, these are the thugs. There's nothing else to it. There's absolutely no respect to those guys. The fact that they took the power and they have the buttons on on economy, on military, that doesn't mean that they actually are respected human beings, as you see it now. No Ukraine is going to respect. Even I can't even imagine how negotiations are going to be now after Bucha, Stomel, what's happening in Mariupol. How many people are, you know, you have to realize the first they did, they were trying to save Russian-speaking people, and they attacked Russian-speaking cities. Kharkiv, Kiev, Kherson, Mariupol, it's all Russian-speaking. There are no Ukrainian-speaking people there. Because they were attacked by these Yakuts, Burats, Chechens, and you name it. So that's the idea of what's going on. And I understand, I hear the, you know, again, I have some friends from Palestine in LA, very respected people. Not just by me, but by the world. So I know what's going on. But the Russian propaganda is enormous. It's absolutely enormous. And the Palestine should know what propaganda is, because Israel has the right of way on PR, right? The whole PR that the world hears is from Israel, not from Palestine. So imagine the same thing about knowing about Ukraine is only coming from Moscow office, not from Kiev. Reuters, the very respectful news organization, was based in Moscow, never in Kiev. So every news they got was from Moscow office. And guess who's telling them the news? So that's how it's two fronts in the world right now. One is probably more important is the propaganda, because that's the main tool to welcome the minds of people, to welcome the Russian troops into their territory. That's number one task. And number two are the rockets that actually go in there and justifying the killings, because the mindset, it's okay to kill.
Okay, we have left 5 minutes more. We'll go back to Palestine. Mr. Ilyas, what is the update over there now?
Well, today was quite a busy day, because early in the morning, the first thing we started the morning with the Israeli troops shutting down the entrances to Al-Aqsa Mosque to prevent Palestinian Muslim worshippers from going into the mosque, only to find out later on that some 100 Jewish zealots were allowed to enter the mosque and walk and tour in the plaza surrounding the mosque within the walled area, the compound of the Al-Haram al-Sharif. And this is now, yesterday I remember you asked me this question about what was happening, and I said, well, it's quiet because the religious Jews don't drive cars on Saturdays, so that's why they did not show up. But today they came in the morning and they went into the mosque in what has become for the Palestinians sort of a daily provocative routine of these tools, that the ultimate goal of them, as perceived by the Palestinians and as sometimes even illustrated and expressed by extreme right-wing Israelis, is to take over the mosque and build, possibly even destroy it and build the third temple on its place. In addition to this, there were quite a number of arrests in Jerusalem of some Palestinian youths who were walking around in the streets of East Jerusalem. But the main story today was the Israeli announcement that the two Palestinians who carried out a stabbing attack in the town of El-Ad inside Israel 3 days ago were caught this morning. And we had some pictures of them that we put earlier on the BBTV website. And this is it. This has become a daily menu for the Palestinians living under occupation. The same thing that our friends in the Ukraine face every day about all these kind of attacks and bombing and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, this kind of sad events they repeat themselves day after day, that they become something like normal to the outside world. And people just get used to it. They live with it because, well, okay, this story has been going on for 70 years. It can go on for another 70 years. Our friend spoke about the conflict that started in 2014. That was 8 years ago. But now people would say, these guys have their headache for the last 8 years. Let them. They can live through it another 8 years or so. No, we cannot live 70 years more under occupation. I don't think the Ukrainians are ready to live in this kind of condition for 8 more years, and there must be a solution. And the best solutions for all these conflicts is a solution that is based on an agreement. There is no party that can enforce by military power its own will on the others. The underdog of today will become strong tomorrow, if not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, in order to defend himself or herself. And that's exactly the case. People's right to self-determination and freedom have to be honored by all countries, no matter which countries they are, because we believe in the right of every nation to self-determination and to live freely in their own land without any suppression or oppression or threat of oppression by any outside country, including Ukraine, including Palestine, including everywhere else when there are conflicts of this kind.
Yes, Mr. Val, you wanted to say something just now.
Yeah, I know you're limited on time. It's just, I agree with everything you said, but one thing, Imagine if somebody would make an agreement with Hitler. It's impossible. That's the case right now we're dealing with. It's if Hitler was stopped early on, I don't think it would be a big disaster war. But if you go back in the history, when Hitler invaded Poland, for the entire year the world just watched and did nothing, zero, until they realized that they are next. That's what we're dealing right now with.
We are in the 21st century, and things that happened back in 45 cannot repeat themselves today. Today, the whole universe is a global village, and everybody knows everything about everything, wherever it happens. And this means countries cannot go on the rampage and launch the kind of war that Hitler launched in 45. I don't believe that anybody would ever do it, even Putin. No, I don't think that is possible.
He is doing this right now as we speak.
Wars today are more of economic wars and economic conflict. Money and money power and economy are the main tools of the Third World War these days. And we see the Chinese are fighting the rest of the West without shooting a single bullet. They do it through business. And business is where, and that's why you see the business flourishing everywhere, because this is the weapon of the future, the weapon that sheds no blood.
Mr. Val, do you agree with me that with what Russians have did to Ukraine, it is a threatening action or threatening platform by using Ukraine to create the largest European conflict in decade, meaning the war is coming?
The war is here. It's not coming. It's happening. Again, I just made a comparison with the World War II in 1939, on September 1st, when the Hitler invaded Poland, right? And for an entire year, the world was just watching. And then later, even in England, the UK, the Chamberlain and everybody else wanted to make an agreement with Hitler. A lot of countries did. A lot of them admired Hitler, then later found that they were fascists. So it's identical. And it's so parallel to everything that's happening. The propaganda, I mean, it's Goebbels and Lavrov is like one in one. You know, the atrocities that's happening in Ukraine are worse that Hitler did to anybody. Just, you know, you have to realize that these soldiers coming to Ukraine target civilians. The Russian soldiers target civilians. They cut their heads off. They rape women in front of their little kids. And they rape kids as well. Destroy the property. Take everything away. It's a different kind of war. It's a terror. And on top of this, there are ballistic missiles every day. Rockets are going into the civilian areas. This is it's a war happening. That's why it's so dangerous. And it's not a tiny amount of rockets. Again, as I mentioned, it's 1,500 already. And there's 42 million people in Ukraine, 14.5 left. The biggest humanitarian crisis of all time that's recorded. Maybe in Genghis Khan era was bigger, but right now, as we know it, it's the biggest crisis of all. In World War II, 11 million for 6 years. Just think about it. He's not stopping. Putin, you sign an agreement. Putin is not interested to make an agreement with everyone. Do you know what he says? Zelensky has to step down, the military has to put their weapons, and Ukraine no more. That's the only agreement he's saying. That's the only agreement he's saying. Imagine this to Palestine. What would you do? Imagine that. And yes, and you're absolutely right that the world was watching. For example, in 2014, it was invaded and nobody talked about it. It was Russia invaded it and nobody talked about it. Oh, it's Ukraine, they'll deal with us. We'll go on. I agree with that. You know, but now, because Russia is not stopping, and the West, what I mean the West, not America, Europe realized how dangerous that is, because it's so close to rhetoric of World War II, and the Europeans understand this now, because they had it on their soil. They understand what that is. What's happening in Ukraine is genocide. It's not fighting the military, it's a genocide. It's civilians. There's a difference in that. In fact, if you watch Russian TV, they clearly say we have to kill at least 2 million civilians because they support what they call Zelensky. Civilians. You know, it's absurd. Everything they say, it's absurd, but they do it with action. They're actually saying it, and they're doing it. They're killing it. You know, it's not like some news on TV. You know, it's part of my life now. It's part of a lot of Ukrainians' life. Not a lot of, all Ukrainians' life. And now it's impact on Europe because the Europeans now are worried. You know, the Russia's saying it. They want to restore the New World Order, whatever that is. It's called Russian world. When you ask Putin, when does the Russian world end? He said there is no end to Russian world. As soon as people speak Russian, that's all he says, right? So if a Russian speaks in that town, that means that's a Russian world. Well, that means rockets. Well, that means Russian influence, and so on and so forth. And you said about the economy. Yes, that's how Russia got rich. When Putin got to power, he got all the industries to himself from private sector, which is oil and gas and fish and so on and so forth. So, and what happened, he put his buddies there, they became oligarchs all of a sudden, right? And then he got $115 trillion profit for 22 years. Imagine the number, $115 trillion profit. Majority of that profit comes from France and Germany paying for oil and gas, and also Italy. But surprisingly, Italy was the first ones to cut off the oil and gas from Russia, even though the Berlusconi was a huge fan of Putin. But he didn't even accept that fact that Putin is doing this. Berlusconi did. Just think about it. Because the civilized world, what I mean by civilized world, can recognize what is not civilized. And what's happening with Russian soldiers to Ukrainian civilians is not civilized by any means. So, and yes, they're still getting $1 billion a day profit from oil and gas, from energy resources, selling to mostly France and Germany. France already said that they're going to cut it off. Germany are still cozy up with Putin. They still do. And of course, Putin is trying to find, like you said, China, India, Brazil, the new markets, right? Of course, it's less money there, but there's a lot of demand there. So I'm sure the economy of Russia is not going to shrink much because their whole economy goes not to intellectual property or anything like that, not innovation, but all about selling the earth, and that means oil and gas, right? It's not that smart, but that's the truth. And they have the money to do the weapons. However, they need the steel. Where they buy the steel? From China, for example, right? So there's a lot of that happening, but again, money is used for weapons, for war. Fighting with money themselves will not stop Russia, as we see it, right? So, and sorry about that. And they still have the nuclear weapons. We don't know if they function because the Russian country is very corrupt. All the generals obviously get the money, get the yachts and London real estate, but I'm not sure if all the weaponry is maintained as Putin hopes. You know, I'm not sure if you guys know, but Putin and the whole his band thought that they're gonna take Kiev and Ukraine within 2-3 days. Every soldier who kept it saying that. And you're saying that they were afraid that Ukraine is going to invade Russia? If they thought that rhetoric 2-3 days and it's done? It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. His idea is very aggressive. That's why I'm comparing this to Hitler. And that is why Europe is acting. And by the way, when Hitler was in power, America didn't act either. It didn't. Until the very end. And the Lend-Lease was given to the Allies and Soviet Union in 1943. It's like 4 years after the actual invasion of Hitler. So America was the last one to join in to do anything good. You know, but Europeans had to fight it, and that's a memory of Europe that's not far. It's 80 years ago. You know that the World War II was here. It's still people alive who remember that. So that is why it's important to understand that. So, and what's happening in Ukraine, and you said it's 21st century and the money and all this is, yes, the globalization, I understand that's very well. In fact, you know, Hitler was also using its economy to weaponize his country. There is no difference. I mean, imagine this in 200 years. So we're going to say, oh, it was that year. It's going to be the same people. They're going to have the same mentality, and it's going to use the same thing, either it's money, resources, energy, sun resources, whatever it is, to weaponize themselves and destroy other nations. Nothing's going to change. What I would agree with is that the new security measures need to be placed on Earth. UN doesn't work, NATO doesn't work, obviously. So something needs to be done, completely different. Well, I would agree with that statement. And I'd say that something after this war is over, and I think the only time this war is going to be over when Putin decides to stop it. That's the only way. Or he's going to be killed. Either or. There's no other way. Like Hitler. So then we'll probably talk, and the whole world will talk, and you'll probably see this rhetoric is going to happen. NATO doesn't work. UN doesn't work. That's as simple as that. So people need to do something. And by the way, I'm not sure if you guys know, but UN was established by Ukraine as well. Ukraine was a signatory in San Francisco. So, and it means nothing, right? So all these bureaucracies that people believe in the left side, like, oh, you know, it's all about, you know, putting flowers and peace and all that stuff. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Because the aggressor is going to use everything in their power, including economy and anything else, to invade, to make the powerful himself, like Russia is thinking of themselves as super powerful for some reason. They didn't invent anything. Nobody buys Russian cars, nobody buys Russian computers, nobody buys Russian music, Russian movies, nothing. But yet they think they're very powerful, right? It's like a boogeyman, you know. If you think about the economy, so how does the economy of Russia get generated? By simply selling what they see on Earth. It's not that smart, is it? So what I'm trying to say that the future is going to be different. And yes, it's a World War III as we know it, whether you like it or not, because every country is supplying weapons to Ukraine. So by de facto, already we're fighting with Russia, everybody. The World War III doesn't mean every 200 countries fight, right? It means the major countries fight. That's what World War means. The World War I, only 3 countries fought. So you have to realize what these names mean. And right now we see the same thing. And if Russia is not stopped, if it's welcomed and enabled, it's only going to grow. And their method of Russian world, we see in Ukraine what that means, growing Russian influence. It's nothing but Bolsheviks cutting heads, raping women, destroying everything they have, and implementing their Russian world. And everybody has to speak Russian. That's the bottom line of Russian world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Val, for joining us. Mr. Ilyas, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for joining us with the update. And we will get back. We will come back to you again tomorrow, Mr. Ilyas, for more update from Palestine. And we will try to get more update about Ukraine from Mr. Val again. And until then, good night and good morning to the Americans and to the Palestinians. And good night to the Malaysian. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.